So hello everyone, my name is Ashton Gleckman with the Global Composers Network. Today I'm grateful to be joined by composer, musician, and conductor Benjamin Wallfisch. Benjamin, thanks so much for taking the time to chat today, and congratulations on the immense success of It and Blade Runner.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, so I'd like to start off by talking a bit about your upcoming as a composer, and then move on to a little bit about Blade Runner and It, and a few technical questions from GCN members.
Okay.
So, first question. So, what was your first experience with music, and how did growing up in a very musical family influence you?
I think my first memories with music were hearing Bach played every morning by my dad. He'd always warm up with the six suites for solo cello, and my mum playing the violin, and my grandpa playing the piano. Music was always synonymous with family, and I guess to this day, whenever I'm working on music, it just kind of feels like home. And I think having musician parents, it sort of it teaches you the value of constantly striving and discovering, and the fact that music is this kind of endless pursuit. I remember as a kid, going into my dad and saying, don't you know that piece yet? You played it 1,000 times, and he would always say, well, there's something more to discover. And I suppose there's something you can learn from that, especially when you're creating music. And yeah, growing up in London too, in the 80s and 90s, was always very interested in movies, and it was a great time to be a kid with all those incredible scores of John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith, and all the rest of that extraordinary period in film music. But also, I was very interested in the rave scene, the electronic music coming up in the 90s in London. And also, being having those opportunities with classical music when I studied. So I guess as a kid, it was just about treating music as something which is constantly evolving and multifaceted, but also something that needs a lot of work. And seeing that firsthand from my folks, I think was a great thing.
So what was it about the relationship between picture and music that really tugged at you and sort of called you in?
I think it's something about the sort of emotional impact of those scores. I remember as a kid when I saw E.T., I was immediately taken by something I didn't know how to describe, but it felt so powerful. I remember getting the LP and trying to figure out the piano piece that you hear over the end roller, and just understanding why those sevenths and that chromaticism of the chord progression has that sense of hope, but melancholy all mixed in. And you can say that now, but as a kid, I had no idea that's what was going on. I was just kind of trying to understand. And I think it was a sort of a passion for film in and of itself. Just, I loved the scale of cinema and how exciting the process is. I was always fascinated with, at one point I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll be a cameraman. There was a period in my early, I was probably 10 or 11, where I would film everyone with this huge VHS video camera my dad bought for the family, and annoy everyone. It's always filming everything and making these very basic movies by, having two VHS machines and press and record on one and stop and start on the other, like as primitive as it gets. But I guess as a kid, was just fascinated with the process of filmmaking. And then, of course, with that passion for music, it just, for me, was like, well, of course, I'm going to find a way to bring those two things together. And I was just very lucky, I guess, to know that kind of early on.
Yeah, so it's been an extraordinary year for you. The first time I heard you was for David Sandberg's Lights Out, which is a truly incredible score, and it sort of, for me, really put you on the radar, and then you just kept releasing these extraordinary scores, and you just recently collaborated with him on Annabelle Creation, which was also a fantastic score. And then you just hit home with Blade Runner 2049, which is extraordinary. And I'd like to talk about that for just a little bit.
Sure.
So Blade Runner, which came out in the 80s, was a truly revolutionary score that set the stage for so many scores to come. Can you talk about you and Hans's approach to returning to that sonic world that Vangelis created?
Well, the Vangelis score is just synonymous with Blade Runner. You can't separate the two, and it goes beyond just the sound and using those synths. It actually is an attitude and a sense of structure too, and how the music breathes and has a kind of majesty about it in the original score, and there's a freedom. It sounds improvised. It sounds like it flows and is isn't sort of it's a very horizontal attitude, I guess is the best way of saying it. And I guess whenever you start any movie, well, this is for sure the case. It's so important to start with a blank canvas and really find the inner truth of that particular story and what that truth can sound like musically, and find a way in which is always completely new. And so when you have something as iconic and stunning and beautiful as the original Vangelis score, the first thing was to say, well, of course we have to acknowledge that and pay our respects. But even more important was to serve this completely new story. And in Blade Runner 2049, it's a very different narrative, and it examines completely, of course it's totally linear in the world of Blade Runner, but here we're talking about truly the examining the idea of consciousness and what it means to have a soul, and how do you define humanity in the context of if you're born, does that make you actually human? And all these, in the context of replicants. And I mean, these are very big questions, and also the visual sense and the pace of the editing, they're completely logically connected to the original movie, but just something new and astonishing. And so I think something that Hans and I spoke about from the very start was just, of course, we have to be in Vangelis' world, but we have to really create something that feels like it's 30 years later in the story, and something that is new.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I found really interesting when watching the film is that Kay, sort of along the story of the film, Ryan Gosling's character sort of becomes more and more human in a sense, because he starts making decisions sort of for the greater good, especially making decisions about, doing all that he can to protect Deckard. So how did you work with his character arc and develop it musically throughout the film?
No, you've hit the nail on the head there. And I think the idea of him going through a crisis of identity and questioning everything about his own existence forces him to confront the truth of that idea of what is it, replicants are more human than human. But, and in the sense, you're right, then empathy and finding the great power in allowing another person to reach, a true sense of, atonement in their own journey, like with Deckard meeting his daughter. Huge spoiler alerts everywhere here, bloody hell.
We'll put it on the video.
Let's just assume everyone's seen the movie.
Yeah.
It's something, the character arc there is actually almost, you kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture of because we created this theme, which we call the horse theme, which you hear at the very beginning. It's just that 4-note tune. It's F sharp, A flat, and there's something kind of interesting there because it's symmetrical. And you can turn it upside down, it still has the same identity. And because it's 4 notes, there was a sort of correlation to the idea of the 4 acids in a DNA chain, which is alluded to a lot in the story. And every time there's a moment of crisis or a significant development in the puzzle, you hear that tune, but the tune evolves. The sound of the tune, firstly, it's very pure, and then it becomes almost like a cry for help, and then eventually it feels resolved and is eventually combined with the puzzle theme, which are those piano chords you hear over the opening titles and occasionally occur when you see the serial number on the bones. And then at the very end, you hear the horse theme and the puzzle theme combined. So there's a sense of resolution when we realize who the daughter, who the child replicant is. And so there was an opportunity there, I think, with the theme arc in a very subtle way, because we weren't trying to make like big tunes. It was like, how can we actually condense this down to something very, very simple, and something which will play within the tone and feeling of the movie, the visual spectacle, the unbelievable performances without overwhelming it. And so, yeah, there was that kind of sense of a motivic approach, I guess, and evolving it every time you hear it.
Truly, one of my favorite characters in the whole entire movie was Roger Deakins. I mean, he sort of brought something completely different, and he's of course worked with Denny so many times, and it's just astonishing every time you see it, It's
totally genius work, and the use of light and shadow is I've never seen anything like it, and the way that light moves to in those scenes, in Wallace's kind of office lair, how we call it, and it's truly poetic use of light and shade. I've never seen anything like it.
And I absolutely love how the music sort of seamlessly weaves in and out of the different visual styles. When you enter sort of the reddish and the oranges, and it almost seems like the music just sort of sinks in and melts into it, which is extraordinary. But yeah, so really quickly, can you sort of describe your guys' process? Because I know you guys use both sort of analog and digital synthesis. And of course, you guys worked with the incredible Howard Scarr a little bit as well on this project too. Can you talk about your guys' process with synthesis on Blade Runner?
Absolutely. Hans created an astonishing kind of replica of the CS80 in Yuhei's Zebra synthesizer, which was the first thing we started playing with this patch. And what was fascinating was in Zebra, of course, every parameter is available to you, thousands of filters and different ways of creating interaction between the oscillators. So all the things which the CS80 couldn't do was there, but there was a certain kind of powerful impact of just like a character when we brought in the real thing. And as soon as we started using the CS80 for real, there was just like this, we were making a direct connection to the original soundtrack, but not just because of the sound, but because the way the instrument responds when you play it, because it's alive. Every note is, whenever you play it twice, the tuning is slightly strange, slightly different. You never quite know exactly what's going to come out, in the same way as an acoustic instrument would be. So there was a wonderful few sessions just with the CS80 creating all kinds of textures and sounds which you hear manipulated throughout the score. But the heart of the score, in terms of what you hear the most, is the Zebra synthesizer. There was about 400 patches, which were bespoke to this film, and also the Diva synthesizer was a very important moment for some of the bass lines, like in the Seawall sequence. There's a really angry bass there, which we've made in the Diva. It has just such a sort of vicious sound. And also the Prophet 8, the Dave Smith instruments, was really important for some of the growls. You hear those kind of crazy sort of just filters, which you just have. It's just, you think your ear's going to burn off your head. And also the kind of iconic siren texture, which was a real direct allusion to the original score that was created in a Prophet 8. So really there was that kind of, for me, it was like a family of synthesizers. It's like an orchestra of, I was just imagining these kind of like a dark kind of room of robots creating, interacting with each other with all these synths, because actually it's about how they interact with each other that makes the texture, of course. And by that I mean, use of reverb and delays and production. We were very keen to tip our hat to the original production, using reproductions of the Lexicon reverbs and tape delays of the early 80s. Of course, these are Universal Audio's reproductions of them. But then, scaling that up to a 7:1 mix, and then eventually an Atmos mix, which was done on the dub stage, you're able to kind of take that intention of an inventiveness in the original score and just scale everything up with the technology we have now. And I think the Zebra synth in particular is wonderful for that, because there's just endless possibilities.
Yeah. Did you guys use any of the sort of like Arturia recreation of the CS80 at all?
No, that was sadly not. Well, because when you have the real thing, it's like it becomes a friend, a slightly cantankerous, grumpy friend. I mean, literally, if you plug the sustain pedal into the wrong port, it will explode. It will catch fire. It's that sort of volatile as a piece of kit, and weighs about 500 pounds. But yeah, it sings and creates that dystopian strangeness, which just is part of that whole world. So yeah, it was. And I should also make a shout out to Alan Myerson, who mastered the score. He brought something really special to the overall mix and the overall sound that really makes it just opened up. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Alan is absolutely incredible. He's worked on so many legendary projects too. I mean, he is just the true veteran of film mixing.
Truly, no, he's astonishing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so this is a question from Mitch Gardner on the GCN. So his question is, how hectic is a last-minute call for a score such as Blade Runner 2049, notably with the long 2 hour and 40-minute length?
Well, how hectic? I mean, it's always hectic when you write a film score, but given that, you never think of it as it being hectic. It's kind of, you know, the sense of how much time you have becomes irrelevant. The only thing is you know, what are these ideas that need to be turned into score? That, and what is our director's vision? And when I say vision, I don't just mean overall, but I mean for each individual moment. That, you know, it can be very small as well. And I guess, you know, when there's a time crunch, in my own experience, the taps get opened that much wider. If you sort of like, things just have to flow that much faster. But it's tremendously exciting too. You know, creating music for a living and doing so when you're dealing with such amazing artists like Hans and Denny and Joe Walker, it's inspiring, and you know, it's almost like you can't wait to get back to the studio, because there's just, you know, you come home and there's just so many ideas flowing, and there's all these, you know, such visionary people and masters of their craft, inputting into the whole process, and collaborating with someone like Hans is just, it's always very inspiring, because he has his ideas are often very surprising, and in a way which just makes you rethink. Oh, you know, and sometimes you think that's crazy, but then you try it and it's totally astonishing, like how that will lift a moment. And a good example is the in the movie, the seawall sequence at the end of the film, the huge climax. We all know where we were headed, because you know, the moment where, you know, Joy died, you know, Joy's killed. That was from an early suite, which the filmmakers just placed, and it always stayed like that, right? And they were very happy with. But previous to that, there was a very dense action cue originally, which, you know, was we thought would be the right way to go. And then when we did it in the context of the whole film, it just didn't work. It just took us out of the film. And it was Hans who said, no. What you need to do is elongate that musical climax and make it start earlier, and glue the whole scene together. And that was a fantastic moment in the collaboration, where we just, you know, that kind of all of the pieces came together in the whole score when that climax just kind of worked. So very long answer to a very simple question.
Yeah, so of course, after you see the film and you begin sketching and writing suites and stuff, I know Hans does the whole sort of musical diary format. What's your sort of format in sort of having a very reactive musical response to the edit?
Well, I like to get into the scoring really soon, like really get into working with scenes. That's always my instinct. And, you know, doing these movies with Hans, like Hidden Figures, and now Blade Runner, you know, his process of creating suites, I've started to really adapt that myself, because it creates a wonderful conversation with the filmmaker, and a place where they can be very experimental too, away from your studio. They can take it to the cutting rooms and try things, which is and actually working with Gore Verbinski for 9 months on Cure for Wellness.
Absolutely.
When I was literally in his cutting rooms, that I set up my studio in a room next to where he was cutting. That was a process of so much music away from picture, which he would then use almost like temp, and then send back to me with his own cut, and then further adapt it. You know, it's a slower process, but it just means that the filmmaker feels like they're completely, they can touch the music and make it their own, and ultimately that, you know, you want that synergy of storytelling to be there, and it's a very effective way of achieving it. But, you know, like each movie is different, and for me, you know, it's a balance between that process and then really getting into the actual scoring to picture and finding that nitty gritty.
In terms of like third act, like Cure for Wellness just goes into this insanely unbelievable ball of like fiery,
Right.
awesomeness towards the end, and like the
Yeah.
way that the themes, the way that you develop it, and then reach sort of this fiery conclusion at the finale.
Yeah.
That's a really incredible thing. So what was the process like on that film, sort of developing those themes and of course reaching that eventual crazy ball of fire?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, it started with the waltz. Even before they were shooting, I came out with this, I guess, 6-minute piece, which they shot to, and then there was a completely new waltz, which was then written from scratch. At the beginning of the process, probably took about a month just to write this sort of, I guess it was about 12-13 minute piece, very elaborate kind of Tchaikovsky-esque piece of music, which sort of went way crazy. No, you could never put that in the movie, but it was like a kind of great experience to sort of like see how far we could push that tune and its natural conclusion. And maybe it will see the light of day in a concert suite one day, that version. But it's then was a case of working backwards, actually. They started with the climax of the film in the cut, and that was all I had for about 2 months was Reel 7, and just getting that sequence right, and then at least we knew where we were headed, and then there were all kinds of other thematic needs, like having Hannah's theme, which the opening vocal. What was interesting is that tune works its way into the waltz, but it wasn't the original waltz theme. That was the strange part of that process. So we had to sort of reverse engineer, if you see what I mean. And also, but the first tune was actually the kind of the Volma theme, that strange searching kind of. It's a tune which tries to be beautiful, but it kind of fails. Because it's just a bit harmonically ambiguous the whole time. And that just was one of those processes of finding tunes which worked, but which it's not a sort of motivic theme-led score. It's actually a strange collision of sound design at times and very orchestral darkness and light as well. So the process was honestly with Gore just very intense collaboration every day, almost, where I'd be there in the morning writing, and then, by the way, in the cutting rooms it was not just editorial, it was also VFX, sound. We were all in the same building, so we had lunch every day, and there was that great chance to just exchange ideas and then go away to our own rooms, and Gore would come and visit different rooms, and I remember my sessions with him were just, we were constantly asking questions and making discoveries, and there was no soundproofing, so occasionally I'd be coming up with something crazy, and he'd just come by and put his thumbs up, or come by and shake his head, or there was it was a very
and Gore is also sort of like a musician as well. He's sort of a guitarist,
he's incredible.
Yeah.
Musician.
So what's the process like working with the director who's also a musician then?
Well, Gore is an astonishing musician, as is David Sandberg and Andy Muschietti. I mean, I've been actually very lucky to work with people who are great, who understand composing as well. And I think, and with all of them, and definitely with Gore, he doesn't sort of attempt to communicate like saying this chord should be this chord, or that melody should go that way. He talks to you like an actor, and directs using a really amazingly inspiring imagery. I mean, when you talk to Gore, it's just amazing, the stuff he comes up with, the analogies and just trying to really make you understand. And those conversations really can be quite interesting, because when you've got somewhere, he'll then continue talking and go even somewhere further or somewhere else, and then you find yourself looking again at what you thought you decided on, and endlessly fascinating chats with Gore, and I he's become a really good friend. I just love working with that. I just love working with him as a person, but also with that sense of just, and lots of questions and lots of just striving for something more all the time. It pushes you as someone creative, and yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So can you talk a little bit about that sort of initial conversation with Andy when he first sort of described his vision for the film? Like, were you already familiar with the novel, and what was the first musical material that you actually wrote for it?
Well, I read the book soon after it came out and was terrified and sort of put it away. And then I was really into to Stephen King, Misery and Pet Sematary. I mean, a bunch of books I love. And Andy is just is one of those filmmakers that instantly makes you feel comfortable. And we kind of geeked out for a long time just about our shared love of John Williams, real passion, and also for the way that film music, no, so the film score for this movie had to really pay respect to that very orchestral, thematic, narrative style of scoring, which those movies call out for. Those incredible Amblin films, which are just for me the bedrock of cinema. It's the stuff I love the most, as a kid and still do. And I think with it, really we approached it like an adventure film from a musical point of view. Of course, it's a horror movie, and there's some terrifying things in it. But most of what's in the film is this astonishing sense of adventure and coming of age, and these kids who feel like outsiders who find strength in each other and then coming together as a group to defeat something terrible. We wanted to imbue the score with a sense of hope, and slight mischief and anarchy. And of course, we also have to be really clear about Pennywise's role in the score. That was an early conversation was this idea of using a children's play song, Oranges and Lemons, which was Andy's idea to use that. And I was really struck that he even knew it because it's a British song. And I remember when I heard it as a kid, I was always slightly weirded out by it because it's the lyrics are weird. And as a kid, well, why are we talking about these bells? And then eventually someone gets his head chopped off. And of course, now you look at it, it's a kind of very dark story of a child execution, basically, sung with a very sing-song, playful, innocent tune. And there is a kind of perfect summary of Pennywise. Someone who attempts to be, sweet and playful and glitches, but is unimaginably, terrifyingly dark and evil. And so that was something, but it wasn't enough really it wasn't like Pennywise's theme. It was more his kind of, thinking theme, I guess is the way. And then his actual tune came as a result of just one of those moments of, here's an idea, and it just stuck. And it's a little bit strange and innocent, but a bit like in A Cure for Wellness, it can start very small and end up very big when needed. So how did we start? I hope that answers your question. How did we start? Like anything, you just kind of, there's a lot of kind of shared love of. I mean, the movie, when I first saw it, I saw it actually with an audience in a test screening, and it was just one of those. I just fell in love with those characters and the chemistry. So it was really, the first thing was, how do we really bring that to the fore so the audience just feel connected to them.
And the thing that I just absolutely love about it is, like, right when those vocals come in at the beginning of the movie, it automatically shuts the whole theater up. Like, nobody's talking. Right. That's the one thing you'll notice, that, like, in horror movies, when you go in, just people continue to talk throughout the whole thing. But I think that the thing that made it so extraordinary is actually the contrast between the horror and the darkness, but then the stuff that us as human beings can sort of relate to, being young and having friends. And that's the extraordinary thing. But, it was a very great job.
Well, that's little Elodie Barker, who's such a sweet kid, and she just sang. It was like one take, and that's in the movie.
Wow, that's enough to do it, man. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciated you taking the time.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And again, congratulations on all your recent work. And by the way, everyone,
thank you.
I think that it actually just released a double vinyl from Water Tower Music just recently.
That's right.
Yeah,
it's gorgeous. It just arrived, and I'm like, oh my god, it's beautiful. Yeah, I think they're doing a picture disc too. I hear. I mean, I haven't seen it yet, but they're being incredibly generous.
Yeah, but then of course Blade Runner 2049 is now in theaters. So if you haven't seen it, get your butt out there and see it, because it's extraordinary. And again, congrats to you and Hans, and thanks so much, man.
Oh, thank you. All the best.